A short time ago, on this Senate floor, we witnessed a low point for this body. We witnessed every Republican senator voting against moving forward to consider legislation to strengthen our democracy. We witnessed all 50 Republican senators voting to block consideration of the For the People Act. I don't know why people are afraid of debating this issue, which is so fundamental to our country at this particular point in time. This bill, the For the People Act, has many important provisions. One of them, of course, is to establish minimum national standards to make sure that every eligible American voter can access the ballot box. That should be something we all want. We should want every American eligible to vote to be out there exercising his or her right to vote, to participate in the decision-making in our democracy. And yet, not a single Republican senator voted to proceed with that debate. Even though this bill is more important now than ever before, because we see, as we speak, Republican state legislators in so many places around our country voting to erect barriers to the ballot box. We see this in state after state, a pure partisan power play to rig the rules, to win elections by subtraction, not to win elections through the hurly-burly debate over issues of our day, not to win elections by talking about the agenda that somebody is advocating and why someone should vote for a particular candidate. That's the way it's supposed to be, but these are legislatures that are putting up barriers to make it harder for people to access the ballot, and specifically designing these barriers to try to limit participation by people of color and by younger voters. We saw that even before the aftermath of this election. We saw it in the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision in Shelby v. Holder. We saw Texas and North Carolina and other states adopting these kind of restrictive voting laws. Don't have to take my word for it. The U.S. courts took a look at the North Carolina law that was passed a number of years ago and said that they targeted African American voters with, quote, surgical precision to try to keep them from accessing the voting booth. And that's exactly the kind of thing that's going on now in state after state around the country, trying to win not by the great addition and multiplication of democracy, but by subtraction and by division. And so, why are these states doing this at this moment? They're doing it because of the big lie that was perpetrated in the aftermath of our presidential election. A lie that the former president persists in spewing and repeating to this very moment. The lie that he was somehow cheated or robbed out of an election. The lie that led to the attack on this Capitol on January 6th. It's that lie that is giving rise to these actions in state legislatures. It's that lie that sadly led this body just a short while ago to block consideration of a bill to establish a commission to look at what happened on January 6th. That bill, too, was filibustered, just like this one, in order to prevent the American people from getting to the bottom of the big lie. Republican senators blocked that, too. They don't want the country to know. And they apparently are perfectly happy to allow all these state legislatures to put up barriers to voting as part of that big lie narrative. And we know it's a big lie for so many reasons. Of course, President Trump and his campaign took their claims to courts throughout the country. Over 60 courts said those are ridiculous claims. President Trump's own Justice Department, his Attorney General, former Attorney General Barr, before he stepped down, said there was no wrongdoing in this election that would change any kind of outcome. The president's point person at the Department of Homeland Security, responsible for monitoring the integrity of elections, has testified before Congress and said very clearly that the 2020 presidential election was the most secure election in American history. Most secure in American history. That's from the person in charge of election integrity in President Trump's own administration. And so why are all these states enacting these barriers to voting after an election that the Trump Homeland Security Department said was the most secure in history? It's because so many people turned out and voted in that secure election, and they didn't like the outcome. So when you don't like the outcome in election, instead of taking your case to the American people and saying that vote for us next time because here's our agenda for the country, here's what we're going to do, instead they decided that they're going to try to win by putting up barriers to try to prevent those large turnouts, especially among people of color, and we saw younger voters come out in 2020. So the decision to block this bill from debate is just a continuation of protecting the big lie. It's a continuation of protecting the big lie that is being fueled around the country by Donald Trump's continuous fraudulent claims, which unfortunately have seized the Republican Party. We saw what happened in the House of Representatives. Liz Cheney, a stalwart conservative, ousted from her leadership position because she didn't pay homage to the former president. That's what's going on here. That's what's going on in the House, and that is what's reflected in this vote today. The refusal to even debate a bill to strengthen our democracy. Come to the floor. Tell us what you don't like. Tell us what you want to do. Ask, do you really believe that what these state legislatures are doing is a good thing for our democracy? I know it's easier not to have to talk about that. Easier to ignore it all. But we're not going to let this issue go away. We're going to be here week after week to make sure that we continue to push this For the People Act. Now, in addition to the provisions to establish minimal protections so every eligible voter can access the voting booth, the For the People Act also has a number of other very important provisions that are overwhelmingly popular with the American people. One of them is the incorporation of what's known as the Disclose Act. The Disclose Act does a very simple thing. It gets rid of secret corporate money being plowed into our elections through these secret super PACs. You know, what happened after the decision in Citizens United were two things. One, corporate money now could flow in unlimited amounts into elections. But the Supreme Court at the time said, you can at least be aware of who's spending all this money if you pass laws to make sure it's transparent. In fact, a lot of the justices who voted to overturn the Citizens United, voted to allow corporate money in politics, who were the majority in Citizens United, also said in that same opinion that they essentially expected Congress to enact laws to ensure transparency. In fact, 8 of the 9 Supreme Court justices in that case took that position. And yet, the Republican leader who in the early 2000s called for more transparency when it came to money being spent in elections is taking the opposite idea. We don't want the public to know who is spending all that money. We want it to be secret. I think most of us would agree, and I know the American public agrees, that they have a right to know who is spending millions and millions of dollars to try to influence their votes. We know that because survey after survey shows that Republicans, Democrats, and independents all agree that they should know who is spending all of this dark money. When you see a TV commercial that says, paid for by the Committee for America, you should know who is financing that ad to try to influence your vote. It's a very simple principle. Voters have a right to know. It was a principle agreed to by, conservative jurists like Justice Scalia. And yet, the position of the Republican senators today was, we don't even want to talk about that. We don't even want to debate that provision. By the way, that provision, the Disclose Act, passed the House back in 2010. And it came here to the United States Senate. And the Senate version of the Disclose Act was debated on this Senate floor. 59 senators at that time voted to proceed with the bill. You might say 59 senators, that's a majority. Why didn't it pass? Because of the filibuster rule. They needed 60. 59 senators said, we want disclosure. 59 senators said, get rid of secret money. But because of the filibuster rule, it didn't pass. It couldn't get to final passage on a simple majority. If that had passed back in 2010, we wouldn't have our airwaves flooded with secret money today. We would have done what the American people wanted. The Disclose Act is in this bill now. And once again, 11 years later, Republican senators are filibustering the bill for the Disclose Act. They don't want the American people to know who is spending all of that money, mostly corporate money, flowing underground, under the radar screen, through our political system to try to elect candidates of the choice of whatever special interests are spending that money. But they don't want you to know who they are, who's spending all that money to elect people. So why don't we all agree we're going to get rid of secret money? Apparently, we don't even want to debate that. Another provision that is universally popular with the American people is the idea that we should have nationwide, nonpartisan congressional districting. Let's draw congressional districts not based on politics, but based on some nonpartisan criteria. I think we've all heard the line that it should not be the case that politicians are picking the voters. Voters should pick their elected officials. These days, people can draw congressional districts maps with incredible precision with the use of computers and literally try and draw a congressional district designed to get exactly the electorate they want. I don't think that's the way the founders expected it to end up working, to get a computer that could draw these districts with that kind of precision accuracy. And so one of the other important provisions in the For the People Act is let's draw congressional districts so that we, the people, can make these decisions without the lines having been drawn to predetermine the outcome. That's also in this bill. It also has some other important provisions that I support to try to reduce the impact and influence of big money contributors, to allow people with lesser means to be able to contribute to elections and have some element of public financing so that the system is more geared toward the public interest than relying exclusively on the private big contributions. That's another provision that's in the For the People Act. Some people may disagree with that. Come to the floor, debate it, offer an amendment to get rid of it. Let's vote. But what we saw today was a refusal to engage in the democratic process of debate and consideration of a bill. They used this provision, the filibuster provision, to block a bill to help protect and strengthen our democracy. And that is a sad and shameful day in the United States Senate. But I'm going to end with this. This issue is not going away. I was glad to see that even as every Republican senator voted no, every Democratic senator united together to say we stand for the idea that we should have some minimal national standards for access to the ballot booth to protect our democracy, that we should get rid of secret money in politics. Every Democrat said, let's proceed to debate a bill that has those important provisions in it. And so we're not going away. This is a vote that may be a temporary setback, but it's my strong view that at the end of the day, democracy will prevail in the sense that it will be strengthened, and that the American people are not going to stand for a process that reinforces the big lie that was perpetrated on this country. And so the good news, as I said, is every Democratic senator said yes to moving forward, and we will find a way to get this done. We will find a way to protect our democracy. And I yield the floor.